Here is something that not a single journalist at any press conference today has actually addressed. Iran's foreign ministry confirmed this morning that Tehran will not be dispatching negotiators to Pakistan for the second round of diplomatic talks. The ceasefire expires on Wednesday. Vance, Witkoff, and Kushner boarded their flights to Islamabad regardless, and China, the country whose oil purchases hand Iran the economic breathing room to keep refusing, whose satellite data guided Iranian strikes against American military installations, whose Security Council veto blocked every enforcement mechanism Washington pushed for, issued absolutely no statement about Iran's refusal. Not a single word about the Tuska, the Iranian cargo vessel America intercepted on Sunday that was sailing directly from China toward Iran. No call from Wang Yi urging Iran back to the negotiating table. Complete silence. I want to spend the next several minutes explaining precisely what that silence is communicating, because I believe China's silence today is doing more heavy lifting inside this negotiation than anything Washington or Tehran has said publicly. Let me begin with Iran's refusal, because the way mainstream coverage is framing it is fundamentally misleading, and understanding why it is misleading is essential to understanding what China's silence actually means. Every major outlet is treating Iran's refusal as pure obstinacy, bad faith from a country playing games with a ticking ceasefire clock. The prevailing narrative is simple. Iran is the obstacle. If Iran would simply board a plane, a deal could happen. That framing completely misses what Iran is actually calculating. Iran's refusal is a deliberate strategic decision, and that decision is rooted in a very specific set of experiences. Consider what happened in round 1, 21 hours in Islamabad, the highest level direct American-Iranian meeting since 1979. Vance and Ghalibaf seated across from each other with Pakistani mediators in the room, and when it concluded, Ghalibaf said something worth examining word for word. He stated that before the negotiations, he emphasized that Iran possessed the necessary goodwill, but that due to the experiences of 2 previous wars, Iran had no trust in the opposing side. He was describing a trust deficit, not a military gap, not a capability miscalculation, a trust deficit. The historical record supports that assessment entirely. America signed the JPOA in 2015 and walked away from it in 2018. America announced a ceasefire and then imposed a naval blockade within that same ceasefire window. America's president told reporters that Iran had agreed to everything. Iran's foreign ministry went public calling those claims completely false. IRGC stated that Iran was within reach of a deal before America shifted the terms. One American source told Reuters the two sides were 80% of the way there. Iran got within 20% of the most consequential agreement in half a century and then watched the conditions change beneath them. And then on Sunday, America fired rounds from a naval gun into the engine room of an Iranian cargo ship, sent Marines rappelling from helicopters onto its deck, and announced the seizure across social media. The vessel had originated from China and was bound for Iran. Iran's foreign ministry called it direct evidence of America's absence of genuine diplomatic intent. Iran's state media described the second round of talks as a staged performance designed to allocate blame rather than reach an agreement. That is not stubbornness. That is a country that has absorbed 2 broken nuclear agreements and 52 days of active warfare and arrived at a very precise conclusion about how much American assurances are worth once the cameras are switched off. There is something else buried inside Iran's refusal that the coverage is missing entirely. The Iran you are watching across these news cycles is not a single unified actor. It is 2 competing power centers operating simultaneously under one flag. There is the Iran of IRGC, the foreign minister, the trained diplomat, the negotiator, who sat in Islamabad for 21 hours and declared the Strait of Hormuz open on Friday, that Iran wants to reach an agreement. It understands the blockade is real. It understands that if the ceasefire collapses on Wednesday and bombing resumes, the next phase will be significantly harder to endure than the last. And then there is the Iran of the IRG, the hardliners who overruled IRGC within hours of his Hormuz announcement, who dispatched gunboats to fire on passing tankers on Saturday, who issued the formal retaliation statement following the Tuska seizure. These 2 Irans are in genuine and active disagreement about how to navigate this moment, and the reason that internal fracture matters is straightforward. America is attempting to negotiate a deal with one Iran while the other Iran continues firing on commercial vessels. Now let me explain what China understood before it chose to say nothing. China has been the single most consequential external actor throughout this entire conflict, not through military force, not through formal declarations, through 3 specific actions it has executed quietly and consistently since the very first day of the war. First, China has kept Iran economically alive. Before this conflict began, Iran was exporting approximately 1.68 million barrels of oil every day. During the most intense weeks of the war, with Hormuz largely restricted and American strikes at their peak, Iran was actually exporting 1.84 million barrels per day more Then before the war started, consider what that figure reveals. A country whose supreme leader was eliminated, whose nuclear installations were destroyed, whose air defense networks were degraded, was somehow exporting more oil during active warfare than during peacetime. The mechanism is China's shadow fleet tankers operating with falsified transponder signals, flags registered to landlocked nations, ship-to-ship transfers conducted in Malaysian waters, payments routed through second-tier Chinese financial institutions operating entirely outside the SWIFT network. China's official customs data records zero imports from Iran, yet China's documented imports of what is labeled Malaysian crude run to 1.3 million barrels per day, more than double Malaysia's entire national oil output. The arithmetic is impossible unless the oil is originating elsewhere. Currently, 157.7 million barrels of Iranian crude are at sea. 97.6% of it is headed toward China. The naval blockade cannot touch that system. Central Command's own operational language explicitly excludes vessels traveling toward non-Iranian destinations, language constructed with surgical precision so that Chinese tankers would never need to be intercepted. Second, China has shielded Iran diplomatically at every critical juncture. When America proposed a UN Security Council resolution authorizing force to reopen Hormuz, China and Russia vetoed it without hesitation. Not a single nation joined America's blockade. Wang Yi conducted 26 phone calls during the active war period, with Iran consistently on the list, and reporting from the Financial Times, drawing on leaked Iranian documents, confirmed that the IRG used satellite imagery sourced from a Chinese commercial firm to target American military installations, including Prince Sultan Air Base and positions near the 5th Fleet Naval Base in Bahrain. CBS News independently confirmed this through two separate American officials. China provided Iran with the intelligence vision to strike American forces more accurately. Third, and this connects most directly to today's silence, China actively pressed Iran to reopen Hormuz last Thursday. Wang Yi called IRGC directly. That conversation produced Friday's announcement that the strait was fully operational. Trump posted a capitalized expression of gratitude. Oil markets dropped 9%. And then, America maintained its blockade on Iranian ports. Iran reimposed Hormuz restrictions. IRG gunboats fired on tankers Saturday morning. America seized the Tuska on Sunday, and China issued no statement. China pressed Iran to open Hormuz. Iran opened it. America kept the blockade running. Iran closed it again. America seized a vessel that had originated in China, and China responded with complete silence. In international relations, silence from a major power is never simply the absence of a statement. It is itself a statement. And the question is always who is reading that silence and what precise conclusions they are drawing from it. Iran is reading China's silence with considerable accuracy. China's last public action was pressing Iran toward Hormuz navigation. Since that moment, America seized a Chinese origin vessel. Iran declared retaliation. Vance flew to Islamabad. Iran announced it would not attend, and China said nothing. Iran reads that sequence as structural permission, the permission that flows from a partner who is still purchasing your oil, still vetoing unenforcement mechanisms, still supplying the economic oxygen required to keep refusing, and who has concluded that staying silent right now costs China measurably less than speaking would. Consider what it would actually cost China to speak. If Wang Yi issues a formal statement about the Tuska calling on America to release an Iranian vessel that originated from Chinese ports, China publicly confirms that the voyage served Chinese strategic interests. That immediately opens the question of what the cargo contained, and what relationship China actively maintains with Iran's supply network. If Wang Yi calls IRGC and pushes Iran back toward the negotiating table, China accepts direct accountability for whatever Iran does next, including walking away from any agreement China helped facilitate. China does not want that accountability. China wants credit for any eventual deal while bearing zero responsibility for Iranian conduct in the interval. So China calculates the comparative cost of speaking versus remaining silent and chooses silence, and Iran reads that calculation with precision. Our partner has determined that our refusal is acceptable. We can afford to stay away from Islamabad. This is not passive silence. It is an active and deliberate one. China's foreign ministry holds a press briefing every single weekday. The Tuska seizure occurred Sunday. By Monday morning, every major international outlet had confirmed the vessel originated from China. If Beijing wanted to speak, the mechanism and the moment were both available. The absence of any statement is itself a conscious decision, the decision to choose silence over speech specifically because speech carries costs that silence does not. The structural reason China's silence serves Chinese interests better than pressure is straightforward. If Iran reaches a comprehensive agreement, one that formally ends the conflict, reopens Hormuz on American terms, and includes binding nuclear constraints, Iran becomes significantly less dependent on Chinese buyers. A post-agreement Iran, with full sanctions relief and restored access to Western energy markets, does not need to sell its crude at a steep discount to Chinese refineries. China loses the dominant commercial position it has carefully constructed over decades as Iran's primary and often sole customer. America emerges having demonstrated that its combined military and economic toolkit can produce a nuclear agreement, and the prolonged energy market disruption that has been quietly benefiting China's solar panel, battery storage, and electric vehicle export industries comes to an end. The current state of this conflict extended, inconclusive, financially draining for America, commercially profitable for China, serves Chinese interests more effectively than a clean American victory negotiated on American terms. There is one additional dimension that cannot be ignored. The Trump-Xi summit in Beijing is formally scheduled for May 14th. Every strategic calculation China makes between now and that date is being weighed against whether it complicates or smooths the path to that meeting, issuing a formal protest about the Tuska forces Trump to respond publicly to Chinese interference in his own blockade enforcement operations. It manufactures a diplomatic confrontation before Air Force One even lands in Beijing. China will not do that, not for a single cargo vessel. The summit carries far greater strategic weight than any formal protest over one intercepted ship. Now consider the three specific signals worth monitoring before Wednesday's deadline, because the sequence of events across the next 48 hours will reveal more than any official press briefing. The first signal is whether China says anything concrete about the Tuska, not generalized appeals for regional calm, not broad statements about blockade dangers, but something specific about a vessel originating from Chinese ports being seized by an American destroyer. If China remains silent on the Tuska specifically, that tells you Beijing has decided the strategic ambiguity serves it better than any formal protest. If China speaks with specificity, it signals the seizure of a Chinese origin vessel crossed a threshold that even current calculations cannot quietly absorb. The second signal is whether Wang Yi places another call to IRGC before Wednesday arrives. His last call came Thursday and produced the brief Hormuz opening that collapsed within 36 hours. A second Wang Yi call before the deadline would indicate China has concluded that the ceasefire expiring and bombing resuming creates disruptions in oil markets, in global supply chains, in the diplomatic atmosphere surrounding the May summit that now cost China more than the strategic benefits of prolonged stalemate. If no such call materializes before Wednesday, that is China signaling that the current condition remains preferable to an agreement reached on America's present terms. The third signal is what Iran's actual delegation does on the ground, not what its foreign ministry announces publicly. The foreign ministry said no travel. A parliamentary security committee member said a team would likely arrive today or tomorrow. That contradiction is not background noise. It is live information about which internal faction is currently winning Iran's internal argument. If an Iranian delegation arrives in Islamabad despite the official statement, the diplomatic government won that disagreement, and the back channel with Pakistani mediators is producing tangible results that press briefings cannot capture. If no delegation appears by Tuesday, the hardliners prevailed and the ceasefire expires Wednesday with no framework in sight. The core reality underneath all of this remains unchanged. America's pressure strategy is attempting to squeeze a country that retains an economic lifeline America's tools cannot sever, as long as China continues absorbing 157.7 million barrels of Iranian crude through a shadow infrastructure specifically engineered to remain beyond the reach of American blockades and sanctions. Iran maintains enough economic oxygen to keep refusing not comfort, but oxygen, enough to call the talks a staged performance, enough to fire gunboats at a passing tanker on Saturday and claim the moral high ground on Sunday when America responds by seizing an Iranian ship. China's last move was pressing Iran toward Hormuz on Thursday. Since that moment, America seized a Chinese origin vessel, Iran declared retaliation, the ceasefire clock kept running, and China said absolutely nothing. If Iran is reading that silence, and Iran most certainly is, then China's nothing is doing more work inside this negotiation than everything Washington and Tehran have said out loud combined.